Most of you know that I absolutely adore the 1930s and 1940s fashion styles. Those are my preferred eras to emulate. But I know that it can be a little difficult at times if you're just starting out in vintage styles to know the nuances and to understand the details that embody certain eras. I did a video a while back showing you some of the 1930s details, so please do go check that out. I will link it here for you and also put it in the description. But today we are going to talk about the 1940s and what elements really represent this incredibly stylish era, and what I look for when putting together a 1940s style outfit. And of course, I will give you some historical context, and I will share with you some of my favorite source books. Welcome back to Chronically Overdressed. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I hope that you enjoy my content, and please don't forget to click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. I also encourage you to join my Patreon. There you can gain more access to my work and get to know me a little bit better. So let's get right into the fashion details of the 1940s. The styles of the 1940s were largely defined by World War II, but despite the difficulties that the war presented, the 1940s was still a pioneering decade for fashion, especially in America, offering innovative designs and new silhouettes. It's important to point out that this decade really shows the vast diversity of styles, not only throughout the decade with, the first half fighting the war and then the second half recovering from the war, but also the differences based on the level of impact of the war. And what I mean by this is, here in the US, after Pearl Harbor was attacked, the war didn't come to our shores. We weren't devastated by bombings or occupation. So the styles that we in America had were slightly different than the styles that you'd see in England or occupied France or even Germany. This video is by no means a collective of all the 1940s styles from around the world. There were, of course, slightly different styles in countries that weren't directly affected or involved in the war. For the most part, I am going to be focusing on styles from the US, the UK, and Europe. So let's set a picture of what is going on in the beginning of this decade. War was declared in 1939. At the time, the Allied powers were the United Kingdom, France, and Poland. Other countries joined in as the Axis forces began invading Northern European countries. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, the United States entered the war. Materials such as silk, nylon, wool, leather, rubber, and zippers were necessary resources for wartime production. In order to conserve these materials, clothing was rationed in the United States, the UK, and parts of Europe. Clothes rationing began in the US in 1942 with the regulation L85 and ended around 1945. In the UK, clothing items were rationed from 1941 to 1949, a full 4 years after the war ended, and twice as long as the US. Clothes rationing was also happening in occupied and unoccupied Europe, but those records are a little harder to discern. But you can imagine that being in an occupied country, you have less access to the items that you would normally have free rein to get. This rationing and the impact of war in general are the main factors in the changing styles during this period. 1940s fashion designers had to be efficient and innovative in how they made suits, dresses, and shoes to adhere to these stricter standards. The CC41 utility scheme was created in Britain to deal with the wartime shortages and rationing. The CC41 label designated that the item met the government's austerity regulations. In 1942, the U.S. Production Board issued the Limitation Order 85, or L85. These regulations were put in place to help save domestic textile productions for the war effort. Stock of items were reduced and prices were heavily controlled to account for affordability. Restrictions were set such as garment and hem length, number of pockets, number of buttons, and overall amount of fabric used for each garment. The early 1940s style for women was defined by a clean, simple, and fitted silhouette with a somewhat military feel. You start to see wider, boxy shoulders and a slim belted waistline. Due to rationing, there were limits on fabric, so single-pleated A-line skirts and hemlines at or just below the knee was typical. Any use of excess fabric would have been seen as unpatriotic. So if you are looking to do a more authentic 1940s look, just remember that the full circle skirts and petticoats would not have been worn in this era. In Britain, utility and austerity was the goal with style. By 1942, 50% of all clothing produced fell under the CC-41 utility scheme. By the war's end in 1945, this would increase to 85%. In the US, the style was practical, casual, and comfortable, and even sporty at times, with the growth of sportswear and ready-to-wear items. The shirtwaist dress and the popover dress became very popular, and trousers and play suits became everyday attire. As the U.S. became more involved in World War II, women took on a larger role in supporting the war effort by joining the armed forces as WACs and WASPs, and volunteered for associations like USO, WAVES, and Red Cross. But they also started working outside the home on the production lines and in factories and administrative offices. Separates such as skirts, trousers, and blouses and cardigans became much more commonplace. These separates could be mix and matched, so you could actually create many more outfits with just a few garments. In Britain and occupied Europe, women were strongly showing their support by working with various military outlets, planting victory gardens, and working as land girls, and even fighting for the resistance. Now, women's hats and accessories weren't subject to much regulation during the war, so women relied heavily on accessories to truly show their style and their personality. Hats were made in a variety of styles, both small and simple or larger, more elaborate styles, with many having patriotic or military styling. Turbans made out of scrap material or scarves were quite popular, sometimes adding a large flower to decorate them. And snoods were a practical yet stylish hair accessory, often worn with a beautiful hat. 1940 shoes featured a chunkier style with squared heels. Lace-up Oxfords and heels, wedge style, and platform soles were very popular. Commonly made of heavier fabrics, cork or rope, and even reptile skins. A range of colors could be found in accessories, from the basic brown, black, olive green, and light tan, to a splash of patriotic reds, whites, and blues. and of course in the summertime, all of the bright primary colors. For a fascinating look into the colors of the 1940s, I highly suggest this video from the Ultimate Fashion History YouTube channel. It is a really interesting look into the color palettes of the era. As the Paris fashion houses suffered during the Nazi occupation of Paris, American fashion designers flourished and stepped up to the plate to take charge of the world's fashion needs. To meet these challenges, American designers found creative ways to design stylish clothing that met the strict ration regulations. American designer Claire McCardell, known in the fashion industry as the creator of American sportswear and ready-to-wear clothing, used materials like denim, seersucker, and jersey to create classic dresses and separates. With restrictions on zippers, most designers saw this as a hurdle. However, McCardell embraced the challenge, and in 1942 she introduced her popover dress in response to a Harper's Bazaar challenge to create something fashionable to wear to clean the house and then go out for a night on the town. Once the war ended in 1945, women's fashion began to return to the more traditionally feminine looks of the pre-war era. While trousers were still popular, dresses really became the go-to look again. Many of the Paris fashion houses reopened and brought a new wave of styles, many featuring a more natural and asymmetrical silhouette, compared to the soft curves of the mid-1940s. And of course, one of the most influential of the era was Christian Dior's New Look collection that brought an air of elegance back to women's fashion. With material restrictions slowly being lifted, designers returned to higher-end fabrics and embroideries. Details such as silk, lace, and beading all returned in the late 1940s garments. So now I'd like to share with you some of my favorite resources and source books for getting that authentic 1940s style. So of course, if you can get your hands on any of these catalogs, Montgomery Ward, Sears, Spiegel, they have just a plethora of beautiful stylings that give you an idea of what the average everyday woman would be choosing to wear. Another great source is finding photos of patterns. A lot of women were still making their own clothing at this time, so looking for 1940s patterns and just kind of seeing the details and the styling. Obviously they're not, they're just illustrations, they're not on actual people, but you get to see the details of the actual garment, which gives you a really good idea of what to look for when you're buying either reproduction or you're buying true vintage. And of course, the 1940s Definitive Sourcebook. This is a beautiful and wonderful book. They've just recently reprinted it. I'm going to put links to all of the books that you can buy down below in the description so you can easily find them. But this is a fantastic book. There's a lot more kind of magazine article and illustrations in here, and a lot of kind of movie stars and some advertisements that you can see in here. But it really does help to understand the details of the styles. This is another amazing book. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It is called 40s Fashion, From Siren Suits to the New Look. And this really goes in depth and it kind of describes everything. I believe it's mostly geared towards UK fashion, but it really has just so much wonderful information in here, beautiful photography. It goes into all of the rationing information, make, do, and mend, and some of the pieces of resistance of what the women were wearing when they were fighting for the resistance. So it's a really great source book that I highly recommend. Now, if you don't have an actual vintage catalog, you can find these Sears. It's a collection of Sears catalog photographs and little cutouts they have the early, mid, and late 1940s. So I love that they break it out into that, because the styles did change. And there are some men's and children's styles in here as well. But these are fantastic, and you can get these on Amazon. I've got the link down below for you. And those are great too for, again, giving that kind of everyday, average American woman look, rather than with, you know, the 1940s fashion source book tends to be more higher end and kind of what the Hollywood starlets are wearing. But those are fantastic just for that, you know, everyday average woman. And then my last two books are this one here, which is Women's Lives and Clothes in World War II. Again, this is geared more towards the UK fashion and talking about the rationing. But this is really great. Lots of wonderful descriptions and beautiful, beautiful photographs and illustrations in here. I really like that. And then if you are very interested in the CC41 utility clothing and that whole scheme in Britain, then you need to get this. This is great. It's a small book, but again, it has a lot of great information about that scheme and how they, you know, really utilized it for clothing. It wasn't just for clothing, it was also for furniture and housewares. And but this is really great. I highly recommend it. I'm going to put all of these links for these books down in the description for you. And I hope that you can, you know, read them and get an idea of what styles and details really embodied this era. Again, it is one of my favorite eras. I love it. I've been, you know, studying this for a really long time. I hope this was helpful to get an idea of what the looks of the 1940s were. I would love to hear your favorite items, like what parts of 1940 styles do you love best? What are some of your favorite colors? Again, I highly recommend you go check out that video. It was really fascinating to hear more about the colors and the palette colors of the 1940s. But yeah, let me know what are some of your favorite style details of the 1940s. I'd love to hear from you. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful for you. Please remember to like, subscribe, send me a comment, and please join me over on my Patreon. I would love to have you. I will see you again soon. Bye.